What if the loneliest part of your life started right after marriage? Claire used to believe that love was enough, that if two people cared for each other, they could survive anything. But over the years, her marriage to Daniel had turned into something that looked perfect from the outside. A tidy home, polite smiles, matching holiday photos, and yet felt empty inside. The laughter was gone. The warmth was gone. And somewhere between bills and work emails, the man who once held her hand at every red light had become a stranger. Each morning, Daniel left early, his mind already buried in business calls. Claire stayed behind, moving through her quiet kitchen like a ghost. The coffee maker hissed, the clock ticked, and she pretended not to notice the silence that had settled like dust over her heart. When did love become routine? She often asked herself, but there was never an answer. Then, that summer, her sister called. She needed a favor. Could her son, Ethan, stay with them for a few weeks during his college break? Claire agreed instantly. It felt nice to have a reason to care for someone again. When Ethan arrived, the house felt alive for the first time in months. He was polite, funny, and kind in a way that didn't feel forced. He carried his suitcase upstairs, thanked her for every meal, and always asked about her day. Claire found herself smiling without realizing it. It wasn't attraction, at least not at first. It was just the relief of being seen again. Every morning, Ethan would make her coffee and talk about his classes, architecture, music, photography. He'd ask about her garden, her favorite books, even her old dreams. No one had asked her about her dreams in years. At night, when Daniel came home late, Claire found herself thinking about those small conversations that made her feel human again, and that scared her. She told herself it was harmless, just family, just kindness. But as days turned into weeks, the house started to change. The air felt warmer, the silences shorter. Even the light seemed softer when Ethan was around. One rainy evening, when Daniel texted that he'd be staying at the office again, Claire sat alone on the couch. She flipped through old photo albums, staring at her younger self, the girl with stars in her eyes. She barely recognized her anymore. Ethan walked in quietly, holding 2 cups of tea. "You okay?" he asked gently. Claire forced a smile. "Just tired, I guess." "You shouldn't have to say that every night," he said, sitting across from her. Those words stayed with her long after he went upstairs. They echoed through her empty room, bouncing off every memory of love that used to live there. Why does kindness hurt more when you're starving for it? That night, Claire couldn't sleep. The house creaked softly. Rain whispered against the window. She sat by her dresser, staring at her reflection, the woman she had become. Lonely, faded, forgotten. She didn't know what she was looking for. Comfort, escape, maybe just a reason to feel alive again. Her thoughts drifted back to laughter, to warmth, to touch. Things that had slowly vanished from her life. She closed her eyes and let the quiet carry her away. Then came the sound of the door creaking open. A faint gasp. Her heart froze. "Claire!" It was Ethan's voice. Her eyes flew open. Panic rushed through her veins. She turned sharply, her face pale, her breath trembling. Ethan stood frozen at the doorway, eyes wide with confusion and guilt. For a moment, neither of them moved. The silence was unbearable. Claire wanted to speak, to explain, but no words came out. Her throat tightened, and tears burned her eyes. Ethan looked away instantly, muttering, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean," before disappearing down the hallway. Claire's chest felt heavy, as if the air had turned to stone. Shame flooded her, not just for the moment he had seen, but for what it meant. It wasn't about what she was doing. It was about what she had become, someone desperate for comfort in a life that had forgotten her. She sat there for a long time, her hands trembling, her mind spinning. The house that had once felt safe now felt like a mirror reflecting her loneliness. She didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan's shocked face. His kindness, his understanding, his sadness. Morning came too soon. The smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen. Her heart pounded. She wanted to hide forever, to vanish before he saw her again. But she couldn't avoid it. Not forever. When she finally walked downstairs, Ethan was there, quiet, respectful, pretending like nothing had happened. He said, "Good morning," softly, his tone gentle, almost protective. Claire couldn't respond. She just nodded and walked past him, her throat tight. The world outside was bright and calm, but inside her chest, everything was chaos. How do you face someone who's seen the part of you even you can't forgive? She thought, gripping the kitchen counter. The phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. Won't be home tonight either. Big meeting. She stared at the screen, numb. Then slowly, she looked toward the stairs, where Ethan had just disappeared moments ago. A storm of guilt and confusion swirled in her chest. She didn't know what hurt more, being caught in a moment of loneliness, or realizing it took someone else's eyes to remind her how empty her marriage had become. The house felt unbearably quiet again. Only this time, it wasn't the silence of neglect. It was the silence that comes after a truth you can't take back. Claire pressed her palms against her face, trying to breathe. But the tears came anyway. Soft, helpless tears that spoke louder than words. For years, she had lived in emotional shadows, convincing herself that being ignored was normal, that love simply faded with time. But now, the illusion had shattered. She couldn't unsee what loneliness had turned her into. And worse, neither could he. That night, she sat alone on the balcony, the cool wind brushing her face. Down the hall, she could hear Ethan's soft footsteps, pacing in his room. Every creak of the floor reminded her that their fragile secret was trapped inside these walls, something neither of them wanted, but both would carry. When Daniel called later, his voice was casual, distracted. "Everything okay at home?" Claire stared into the distance, her voice steady but hollow. "Yes. Everything's fine." But nothing was fine. Everything had changed. The world still looked the same. Same house, same rooms, same people. Yet nothing felt real anymore. Because now, for the first time, someone had seen the truth she'd been hiding for years. Claire's heart pounded as she heard a soft knock on her door later that night, Ethan's voice trembling from the other side. "Claire, we need to talk. How do you face someone who has seen the part of you even you can't forgive?" The morning after that night felt heavier than any Claire could remember. The house was filled with quiet, the kind that made every sound feel too loud. She avoided Ethan's eyes as she moved around the kitchen. The air between them was thick with what neither could say. She felt embarrassed, ashamed, and yet, underneath it all, a deep sadness she couldn't name. Ethan tried to speak once, a soft "good morning," but his voice faded when Claire didn't respond. She couldn't. Every word felt dangerous. She just nodded and left her coffee untouched. Can one moment destroy years of calm? She wondered as she closed herself in her room. For days, she barely spoke. She cleaned the same corners twice, folded the same towels again and again, just to keep her hands busy. Ethan stayed mostly in his room, only coming out when necessary. When their eyes met, both quickly looked away. It wasn't guilt that haunted them. It was the awkward knowledge of something neither had meant to happen. Claire told herself time would fix it, that things would go back to normal. But the silence didn't fade. It grew heavier, more suffocating. One evening, as thunder rolled outside, Ethan knocked gently on her door. "Claire, can I talk to you?" She froze. Her first instinct was to say no, to hide, but something in his voice sounded sincere, gentle, almost scared. She took a deep breath and opened the door slightly. He stood there, unsure, his eyes soft but filled with guilt. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to walk in on you. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." Claire looked at him, speechless. The rain outside hit the window in slow rhythm. "You didn't do anything wrong, Ethan," she finally whispered. "It was me. I shouldn't have—" He shook his head quickly. Please don't blame yourself. You just looked sad. I didn't see anything wrong. I just saw someone lonely." That word again. Lonely. It hit her like a mirror shattering. Tears stung her eyes, uninvited. "You think that makes it better?" she said quietly, almost angry at herself. "You weren't supposed to see me like that." Ethan lowered his eyes. "Maybe, but you shouldn't have to hide pain like that. Nobody should." For the first time in a long while, Claire couldn't hold her emotions back. Her chest tightened. Her voice trembled. "You don't understand, Ethan. It's not about being seen. It's about feeling invisible for so long that you forget you even exist." He nodded slowly. "I think I do understand more than you think." The honesty in his tone disarmed her. There was no judgment, no discomfort, just quiet understanding. It felt strange, healing even. That night, after he left, Claire sat on her bed and cried. But these weren't the same tears of shame from before. They were tears of release. The kind that come when someone finally sees the truth you've been hiding from yourself. Is it possible that kindness can hurt more than cruelty? Over the next few days, things shifted. The silence softened. Claire began to breathe again. She made breakfast for both of them, and Ethan joined her without awkwardness. They talked, not about what happened, but about everything else. About life, books, small dreams, and memories that made them laugh. It wasn't closeness in a forbidden way. It was comfort, fragile and human. Something both desperately needed. But deep down, Claire knew the line between care and connection was thin, and her heart was already dangerously close to it. One afternoon, Daniel called from the office. His voice was casual, distracted, like always. "Hey, just checking in. I might be away for a few more days. Work's been insane." Claire murmured a quiet "okay" and hung up. She didn't tell him about Ethan's visit to her door. She didn't tell him about her tears, her loneliness, or the strange sense of peace that Ethan's words had given her. That evening, she found Ethan sitting on the porch, sketching the view of the rainy street. "That's beautiful," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "It's peaceful here. You have a kind of sadness in your home, but it's still peaceful." Claire looked out at the rain. "Sadness doesn't always mean something's broken," she said. "Sometimes it just means something is missing." He nodded. "And do you think you'll ever find what's missing?" She didn't answer, because she didn't know. The next morning, when Claire came downstairs, Ethan was gone. Only a note on the kitchen table remained. "I'm heading out for a few hours. Don't worry, I'll be back for dinner." But the day stretched endlessly. Rain turned to sunlight, and still she couldn't stop thinking about that conversation, about what was missing, about what had been lost long before Ethan ever walked through that door. Can you blame someone for making you remember who you are? That evening, she found herself replaying her entire marriage like an old film. Daniel's laughter when they were young, the way he used to bring her flowers, the long nights when they'd talk about everything and nothing. Somewhere along the way, life had gotten louder, and love had gotten quieter. The realization ached. Because she didn't hate Daniel. She missed him. She missed them. When Ethan returned later, carrying groceries, he smiled at her like nothing had changed. "Thought I'd help you cook tonight," he said cheerfully. They cooked together, laughter filling the kitchen for the first time in months. For a few precious moments, the weight lifted. Claire almost forgot the ache in her heart. But just as easily, It returned when she saw a message flash on her phone. Daniel. Don't wait up. I'll be late again. She stared at the screen, feeling her throat tighten. Ethan noticed her silence. Bad news? She forced a smile. Just the usual. He didn't say anything more, but his expression said everything. Empathy, concern, and something unspoken. That night, after Ethan went to bed, Claire stood alone in the kitchen. The smell of their half-eaten dinner still hung in the air. She looked at the empty chair where Daniel should have been. For the first time, she realized how truly alone she had been all these years. The next morning, she woke up determined to talk to her husband, to tell him how far apart they had drifted. But before she could even dial his number, the front door opened. Daniel stood there, unexpectedly home early, his eyes tired but curious. He looked around the house, then at her. You seem different, he said slowly. Everything okay? Her breath caught. Different. The word echoed. Ethan's words replayed in her head. You shouldn't have to hide pain like that. She didn't know what Daniel saw in her eyes just then. Guilt. Courage or something else. But before she could answer, Ethan walked into the living room, unaware that Daniel had come home early. The world seemed to pause. Claire's heart pounded as Daniel's gaze shifted from her to Ethan, confusion flickering across his face. Claire stood frozen, realizing that the silence she had tried to keep hidden was about to speak louder than any words ever could. What happens when someone outside your marriage reminds you what love is supposed to feel like? The morning Daniel came home early, the air inside the house changed. The sound of the door closing felt sharper than usual, like the beginning of something neither of them was ready for. Claire's hands trembled as she stood by the kitchen counter, trying to look normal, trying not to let her heart give her away. Daniel looked exhausted but curious. You seem different lately, he said slowly, watching her face. Is everything all right? Before Claire could answer, Ethan walked in from the hallway, still unaware of Daniel's presence. He froze mid-step when their eyes met. The tension was instant, thick, silent, unspoken. Daniel looked from Ethan to Claire, a faint frown appearing between his brows. How much can silence reveal? Claire wondered, her pulse racing. Ethan quickly broke the silence. Oh, hey, Mr. Collins. I didn't know you were home. His voice was steady, but his eyes gave away discomfort. Daniel nodded. Yeah, came back early. Claire stepped in quickly, forcing a small smile. He was just helping around the house. I asked him to stay for dinner. Daniel didn't respond. He simply nodded again, his gaze lingering on Claire a moment too long before he walked past them. The sound of his footsteps up the stairs felt heavier than ever. That night, the house was quiet again, but not the usual quiet. It was the kind that comes after an earthquake, when everything looks the same, but nothing really is. Ethan stayed in his room. Claire stood by the window, heart full of fear and confusion. She hadn't done anything wrong, not in the way people imagine, yet guilt weighed on her like a secret too heavy to carry. The next day, Daniel asked her something he hadn't asked in years. Claire, are you happy? She froze. The question hit like cold water. She wanted to lie, to keep peace, to protect what little was left between them. But the truth was too strong to ignore. I don't know anymore, she whispered. Daniel's face softened, almost as if he'd been expecting that answer. I've felt it too, he admitted quietly. You're here, but you're not really here. His honesty caught her off guard. For the first time in years, he wasn't talking about work or deadlines. He was talking about them. About the distance, about the silence that had slowly built up between two people who once couldn't stop talking. They sat across from each other, not as husband and wife, but as strangers who had once loved each other deeply. The words came slowly, painfully. Daniel confessed how he had buried himself in work to avoid feeling like a failure, how success at the office had become easier than fixing what was broken at home. Claire told him about the loneliness, the fading connection, and the ache of being unseen. For the first time, they both cried. Quietly. Honestly. Can love survive after both hearts have stopped trying? That evening, Daniel went for a long walk alone. Claire stayed in the kitchen, wiping tears she didn't even realize were falling. When Ethan entered quietly, she tried to compose herself. "Everything okay?" he asked gently. She nodded weakly. "We just talked." He looked concerned. "That's good, right?" "Maybe," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Or maybe it's the beginning of the end." Ethan hesitated, unsure what to say. He didn't want to make things worse, but he also couldn't pretend he didn't care. "You deserve to be happy, Claire," he said finally. Whatever that means. His words lingered long after he left the room. She knew he meant well, but they only deepened her confusion. Happiness, what did that even mean anymore? That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Every choice felt wrong. Staying felt like pretending, leaving felt like breaking something sacred, and somewhere in between stood Ethan, the quiet reminder that she was still capable of feeling alive. The next morning, Ethan told her he was leaving early for college. He said it casually, but his tone carried weight. "I think it's better this way," he said softly. Claire's chest tightened. "You don't have to go so soon." He smiled sadly. "I think I do." He handed her an envelope. "Don't open it now, just when it feels right." Then he was gone. Just like that. The door closed softly behind him, and silence returned. The same silence she once hated, now filled with memories she couldn't erase. Later that evening, Daniel returned home early again. He looked calmer, more present. "I've been thinking," he said. "Maybe we should take a few days off. Go somewhere. Talk without distractions," Claire nodded. The effort meant something, even if she didn't know what it meant yet. After he went to bed, she sat alone with the envelope Ethan had left. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single note written in neat handwriting. "You taught me what real care looks like, the kind that asks for nothing. Sometimes love isn't about being together. It's about seeing someone clearly, even when they can't see themselves. Don't lose that part of you." Claire pressed the note to her chest, her eyes filling with tears. It wasn't love in the way people would think. It was something gentler. Understanding, connection, a reflection of her forgotten self. Maybe love doesn't always fit inside marriage, she thought. Sometimes it's just two souls crossing paths at the right time. Over the next few days, she and Daniel began trying. Really trying. They went on walks, cooked dinner together, even watched old movies they used to love. It felt strange at first, like meeting again after years apart, but small moments began to rebuild something. And yet, late at night, when the house was quiet, Claire found herself staring at Ethan's note. His words reminded her of everything she'd lost, and everything she might still find. One evening, as Daniel sat beside her, she felt a strange peace. Maybe healing didn't mean forgetting, maybe it meant forgiving herself. But just as she started to believe things might finally settle, the past returned in an unexpected way. A message popped up on her phone, from an unknown number. The words were simple. "I didn't want to leave without saying thank you. For everything." Her heart skipped. She knew it was Ethan. Daniel glanced at her phone. "Who's that?" he asked casually. Her breath caught. She quickly turned off the screen, her pulse racing. "Just a message from a friend," she said too quickly. Daniel's expression changed, subtle but sharp. "A friend?" he repeated slowly. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, both silent, both wondering how much truth was left to tell. Claire's fingers tightened around her phone as Daniel's voice grew quieter. "Claire, is there something you're not telling me? Can a heart still heal when trust has already been cracked?" The room fell silent after Daniel's question. Claire could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, the sound of her own uneven breathing. "Is there something you're not telling me?" he repeated, his tone calm but sharp enough to pierce through her chest. She wanted to lie. It would have been easy. A simple, "No, of course not." But after everything, she was tired of pretending. Pretending to be happy. pretending her marriage was perfect, pretending she wasn't slowly disappearing inside her own home. How long can you hide behind silence before it becomes your truth? Claire looked down at her phone again, at the unsent message she had almost replied to. "It's Ethan," she whispered. "He just wrote to say thank you." Daniel blinked, surprised but calm. "Ethan, my nephew?" She nodded. "Yes, he's been kind. He helped around the house when you were away. That's all." But even as she said it, her voice trembled. Daniel noticed. Years of knowing her had taught him how to read what she didn't say. "Claire," he said softly, "did something happen between you two?" The question cut through her, not because of suspicion, but because of the quiet pain in his voice. She took a deep breath, her throat dry. "No," she said truthfully. "Nothing happened, but something changed in me." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sat down, exhaling slowly. "You know, I've been scared of this," he admitted. "I knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to ask." Tears filled her eyes. "You stopped seeing me, Daniel. You stopped talking to me. I tried to hold us together, but you were never there." He nodded slowly. "And when you stopped smiling, I told myself it was just stress. I thought if I worked harder, if I made more money, you'd feel proud. But I forgot that you didn't need comfort. You needed me." The honesty broke something inside her. For the first time, they weren't fighting. They were just standing in the wreckage of what love had once been, trying to find a way out. Can love begin again from the ashes of regret? They sat for hours, not arguing, not blaming, just talking. About the things they'd both done wrong, about the small ways they'd let each other down. Claire told him how she'd felt invisible, how Ethan's kindness had only reminded her of the emptiness she'd been living with. Daniel listened, really listened, the way he used to when they first met. There were no excuses, no cold defenses, just quiet understanding. When she finally stopped talking, her voice hoarse, Daniel reached out and took her hand. It was the first time in months he had touched her without hesitation. "I don't know if we can fix this," he said softly, "but I want to try." Claire's eyes met his, full of tears. "So do I." That night they didn't sleep much. Not out of anger, but reflection. Both knew healing wouldn't come quickly. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. But somewhere between the silence and the tears, they found something fragile yet real. Hope. The next morning, Daniel made coffee for her, something he hadn't done in years. "We could start therapy," he said gently. "Talk to someone who can help us rebuild." Claire smiled faintly. "That sounds good." And just like that, something small shifted. A beginning where everything once felt like an ending. Sometimes love isn't about holding on. It's about deciding to begin again. Days turned into weeks. They started going on evening walks together, rediscovering little joys they'd long ignored. They cooked, laughed awkwardly at old memories, and talked about things that used to matter. Their favorite movies, the places they wanted to travel. It wasn't perfect. There were moments of discomfort, moments when the past felt too heavy, but each time they chose to stay. Ethan never returned, though he sent postcards once in a while. Small notes about his studies, his travels, always ending with warm wishes. Every time Claire read them, she felt peace instead of confusion. Because now, she finally understood. Ethan hadn't been a temptation. He had been a reflection, a mirror showing her what she had lost and what she needed to reclaim within herself. And in some strange way, he had saved her marriage by breaking its silence. Months later, on a cool autumn evening, Claire stood again on the same balcony where her story had begun. The sky was golden, the air calm. She looked down at the street, watching the soft glow of sunset fill the horizon. Daniel came out and wrapped a light sweater around her shoulders. "It's getting cold," he said with a small smile. She leaned against him, her heart full but quiet. "Do you ever think about how close we came to losing everything?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Every day. But maybe that's what love really is. Choosing to stay even when it hurts." She smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what forgiveness means too." For the first time in years, the silence between them wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. Later that night, Claire went through an old drawer and found Ethan's last postcard. It said, Don't let one mistake define your story. Let it teach you how strong your heart really is. She placed it gently inside a book and closed it. That chapter was over. Her marriage wasn't perfect. But it was honest now. Fragile, raw, and real. And sometimes that's enough. Still, as she lay in bed beside Daniel, her mind whispered one question she couldn't shake. What if life hadn't given us a second chance? She turned toward him, watching him sleep, feeling a strange mixture of gratitude and fear. Because deep down, she knew how close they had come to a different ending, one built on silence, regret, and what-ifs. The clock ticked softly. The house was still. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of a passing train, the same one Ethan used to take when he left for college. For a moment, Claire closed her eyes and imagined another life. One where she hadn't stopped him at the door. One where she had chosen the easier escape instead of the harder truth. Then she turned back toward Daniel, whispering to herself, "No, this is where I belong." But just as she drifted toward sleep, her phone buzzed quietly on the nightstand. A single new message appeared, from an unknown number again. "I'm back in town for a few days. Hope you're doing okay." Her breath caught. The glow of the phone screen reflected in her eyes as she hesitated, staring at the name she thought she'd never see again. Claire's hand hovered over the phone, torn between the piece she had rebuilt and the ghost of the past that had just returned.